Assalamualaikum everyone, my name's Natasha and welcome to the very first segment of Jaaye ki Dawat, where I bring on multiple guests from Shaam ki Chai for a roundtable discussion over, you guessed it, chai or nitro cold brew, or shakshuka, and samosas. आज हमारे साथ है Kalsoom Lakhani. She is the founder of Aaiye and the co-founder of Aaiye Ventures. Hi, Kalsoom. We have Ibaad Rahman, who is the CTO of Beeline Connect. Hey, Ibaad. And Abubakar Khan, who is the founder of the Diaspora Creative. Hey, Abubakar. Thank you so much, you guys, for being on the show. It is awesome to have you guys on here. Ibaad, one thing that you mentioned in your interview was that you identify most as being a Pakistani. So I want you to elaborate on that more and tell me what it means for you to be a Pakistani.
Yeah, for sure. So it's really interesting. So I was born in Zambia, and then I spent a little bit of time in Pakistan, but then moved to the US when I was about 3 years old. I didn't really, I was clearly not an American when I was here. And I didn't really remember Zambia and had no Zambian identity. And my family was all, pretty Pakistani, and my khala with whom I lived, we called her Baji. She was like really Pakistani. She would teach me all these songs like Jive Jive Pakistan, and we would like go to the Pakistan Day Mela in Houston, and so it was like it was just natural for me to identify with with being Pakistani without ever. And it's really interesting because in my whole life I've probably spent the least amount of time in Pakistan out of everyone here on this call. But to me, like being Pakistani is that like pride and culture wherever you are. It's like that yeah, the culture especially where you're everyone is kind of like family. You give and you share, and it's very welcoming and inviting. And it's not like this is yours and this is mine. There's no like line in the fridge with your roommates, stuff like that, right? And so I think that inclusivity is what I identify most with being Pakistani and how I define my Pakistani identity.
That's awesome. Abubakar, you want to add to that?
I always got a lot to say about it. But my family, they migrated out to North America in 1912. So fifth generation out here. And so it was interesting. My mom was born in Multan. I went to madrasa in Lahore. So I got an interesting experience for sure. I got to tour Pakistan when we were filming there last year. The thing for me though is that like the work that I've been doing about uncovering identity, as you just said, Ibaad, to identity, was that even the Pakistani identity, like there was something missing, and that was with people in Pakistan and with the diaspora as well. So I was the youngest member of like the Pakistan Canada Association as their what was my position? I was the one that would go and public relations is hilarious. And so what I kind of find with being Pakistani is that I relate more to even just being Punjabi, just because Pakistan only goes till 47. So that was something where I'm like, yo, it just stops there. But then there's all this incredible history beforehand. And so that's kind of why it was confusing. And also going, just the last part I'll say is with the culture. I met with a lot of different creatives out there in Pakistan, and we were talking about how just the culture, I think a lot of people that migrate from Pakistan to other parts of the world, they kind of like get locked in like, yo, Pakistani culture is this way. And then when they go back, they're like, wait a minute, you guys are all hanging out at like Johnny Rockets. And like, what is happening here? Like, I want my Golgappa on the side of the street. And like, nah, bro, I'm going to what's it called? Gloria Jeans for a meal. So I think, yeah, the culture is always changing. But to answer your question, I think Pakistan, incredible place. I relate more to maybe the Punjabi part of it, but still learning.
Cool. Okay, Kalsoom, what about you? What does it mean for you to be Pakistani? It's interesting. I think you have lived in Pakistan longer than any of us. So I'm really interested to get your take on this.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that for me, my mom is Bangladeshi, my dad's Pakistani. So I grew up, I think I said this to you in our talk, Natasha. So I'm kind of, in some ways, my identity was always fit the best by like the term third culture kid, because I was born in Dubai. My mom's from Bangladesh, so I lived in Dhaka for elementary school, but went to international schools there. Moved to Pakistan for middle and high school and went to the international school in Islamabad. And so I think in all of those places, I never really felt enough of any one of those identities. So I kind of identified at the time growing up, probably like I would call myself half Bangladeshi, half Pakistani. And then obviously my most formative years were in Pakistan. And so, but in Pakistan, I never felt fully Pakistani enough because I identified so closely to my mom's side of the family. 71 and that identity was a huge part of in my own uncovery and discovery of my identity and understanding like what it meant to be like have a Bangladeshi side in Pakistan. And growing up in my teenage years, that was really important for me and a very formative part of how I found belonging. But for me also, when I think about it, because I moved to the US for college when I was 18, I think that, you know, from my perspective, I probably felt the most Pakistani when I was outside of Pakistan in a lot of ways, because when I was there, I probably was never Pakistani enough in terms of my Urdu, or I spoke Bangla better than Urdu when I was a kid. And then it was also like, you know, I sounded too American, or I was too American in my sensibility, but because I went to the international school. And so I think there was a lot of feeling of belonging to Pakistan when I was outside of it and what it meant to represent, to be a Pakistani outside of the US. And especially when I got to college, 9/11 happened my second year of college, right? So it was a very formative part of what it meant to be a Muslim in America, also a Pakistani in America.
Adding on to that, I would love to get your take on Kalsoom then. What is Pakistan's identity? And Abubakar and I talked about this a little bit, where it's not, it tries to, and this was from a media perspective, where it tries to be Bollywood, but it tries to be Hollywood, and it's neither. And it's kind of in this phase of it's trying to discover who it is. And so you've done so much work in Pakistan. So based off of what you've seen, what do you think Pakistan's identity is?
Well, I think the problem is that Pakistan has had an identity crisis since it was born. I mean, it's still having an identity crisis right now, right? I mean, we were born as supposedly a state for a homeland for Muslims, right? And yet it was technically a secular state. And then when you look at like, even when you're driving from the airport in Islamabad, like we used to have like, I forgot the 3 words now, but it was like unity, faith, and something else. Someone else will remind me of this. And I'm terrible because it's like 3 a.m. whenever I'm coming back from the airport. And then it switched one day. I remember I was in college and noticed that faith went up. Was number 1. And that was so interesting to me. That actually reflected where the country was moving and how much more conservative, and also the reflection of Islam and the connection of the Muslim identity to and the religious identity to being Pakistani. And it was not something that I grew up with. I mean, I grew up in a very secular household, very liberal. And so I think being Pakistani means so much to so many different people. And as Abubakar mentioned, you can also feel Punjabi more than you are Pakistani. You can be Sindhi more than you're Pakistani, or Pathan over anything else. And so I think the perspective is that Pakistan is very different depending on who's in power. It's dependent on who's telling us what Pakistan is. I think if you talk to a lot of young people these days, and our fund invested in a localized messenger platform for Pakistan called Teletalk. And their tagline is literally Pakistan ka apna messenger, right? This is Pakistan's messenger platform. And it's very patriotic in terms of what they're promoting and this idea of like regional local languages. So I think language plays a very strong role in the Pakistani identity, this idea of what is like, how are we patriotic to, you know, putting Pakistan first, but then that even is a whole complex can of worms of what does it mean to be patriotic? Does it mean you have to be forgiving of all the transgressions and things that are wrong in the country? Or can you actually be the most patriotic Pakistani because you're willing to actually talk about things that we need to improve on, right? So I don't even know how to answer that in like 3 minutes. I tried, but I think it's such a complex topic, and it's something that I think about a lot, like in the country itself. But I think that it's an identity crisis that I think is still ongoing right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. Ibaad, you want to add on to that? Because I remember we talked a lot about mosque culture in Pakistan, and how it's so different from the mosque culture out here, and how we're raised as Pakistanis, we're raised to look at religion so differently in the West than we are in Pakistan itself, which is supposed to be a Muslim country. So what are your thoughts on just Pakistan's identity in general, and just the relationship of religion with a Pakistani identity?
So it's really fascinating, and I think like Abubakar and Kulsum both kind of mentioned this in different ways. But when you have this perception of Pakistan, of what it means to be faithful as a Pakistani, and when you go to Pakistan, it doesn't always reflect like the perception you may have had, or at least this was my case. And the fact is that there are, it's so diverse, like any place, and you could grow up in a family like Kulsum's that's relatively secular, and or you could grow up in family like mine was a little less so, and it spans that whole spectrum. And I think it's hard to define like specific faith-based attributes to be Pakistani. And one thing that I actually appreciate about the Pakistani culture is that faith plays a part in it, but isn't the like single defining aspect of it. Even though on the Pakistani passport it does say the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, or at least the old ones did. I don't know what the new ones look like. But it's you can still be Pakistani at any level of faith. It's not exclusive, I don't think, at least. I think now you can even you don't you can change like there's a little drop down. I was applying for the NICOP card for my mom the other day, and there's a little drop down for religion now, and it didn't just like auto force you into Islam, which it had in the past. So it's kind
But
of cool.
did you still have to sign that Ahmadis are not Muslims though when you got to do it?
I think once when I did I applied for like a Pakistani visa, I had to sign it. For the NICOP card, you did not.
NICOP you never did, but the Pakistani passport, the question about Ahmadis is not that, it's not like from the beginning, right? It's like, this is signs of persecution of minorities in the country and how it's been state sponsored for so long. But sorry, I know we're supposed to be having patriotic discussions, but I think
no,
an important point
to
make.
The exact discussion that we need to be having, because I think we talk about this a lot in the West, and these conversations don't happen, back home. And so I think it's important. Abubakar, anything to add to this? Pakistan's identity, the role of being Pakistani and being Muslim, and how they intermingle or don't, in your perspective?
Yeah, I'm just enjoying what the Ibaad and Kalsoom have been saying. There's a lot, obviously, to add to it.
Add away.
I think the big thing, just first and foremost, just like you said, the Ahmadi thing. It's interesting. A month ago, I was talking to a good friend of mine. His name is Omar Vandal. Him and a gentleman named Zakir, they made the film on Salam. And it took them over 14 years. I think it was 12 or 14 years to make that film, which was such a great film. But it was because he was Ahmadi. And so they actually raised money in America from Pakistani Americans to make this film. And both of these guys aren't even Ahmadi. They're just guys that are like, dude, we're scientists. One of them works at the Gates Foundation. They're like, we want to make a film on a Pakistani scientist. Like, who do we have to look up to for all these kids? And they see Salam and they're like, this guy's brilliant. So I do think it's interesting. We have the wrong role models. And like you said, Kalsoom, we've had an identity crisis from day one. And so, yeah, I think Pakistan, your question, Natasha, was what do I think about Pakistan's identity right now?
What is Pakistan's identity?
I think Kalsoom said it again, like, okay, look, you're going there. I remember I had a meeting at T2 or something like that in Karachi. And it was this arts little cafe.
T2F?
Yeah. And my friend Arshid, his film was playing there called Abu. Great film as well. You guys should check out. And so I'm sitting there with my friends. And then I listened to 4 young guys are they're in the cafe, and they're my head was hurting. So I'm like, look, what should I take? They're like, yo, take a Panadol. Like, take a Panadol. You need this for your head.
Everything.
Everything. And so these guys are sitting there and they're learning British law. I'm like, why are you guys learning British law sitting here in Karachi? We need to learn British law. We need to go to Britain. And then I started unpacking some more, asked them questions like, yeah, man, we drink Red Bull every day and we take our Panadol. I take Panadol twice a day at least. I'm like, what the hell? This is an example of like, these are the young kids and they're learning British law sitting in Karachi at this really interesting place. So I do think that it's just Pakistan's identity. There's a few different projects now that I've seen. I don't know if you guys have watched Zindagi Tamasha. So yeah, Kalsoom, you've seen it, huh? All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I wasn't going to say anything.
But I thought it was a great project, but it's like Pakistan doesn't even want to watch content that actually reflects its own like its own identity. It would
Well, we
rather.
banned trails as well, right? Like in
What was
terms
that?
of, there's a
We
show,
banned trails.
yeah, the show trails about like literally like women, and like it was banned in Pakistan, right? So, and real quick, can I make a point about T2F? Because I actually think the fact that you were there is really poetic about what we just talked about. So for those who don't know, I mean, Sabine Mahmood, who was a dear friend of many of ours, was actually murdered by someone because she spoke out against things in the country, right? And so T2F for so many of us is like such a central point of like the creative space in Pakistan. And I'm so happy that you were there. And it's something that for me, especially after she was killed, so many people in the country had conversations about this. And yet it's like we still moved on. There wasn't anything that actually really happened, right, to hold people really responsible. And so I think that's the thing. It's like you have people that speak out, and then there's fear about speaking out, right? And then to your point about your friends who are lawyers, the problem in Pakistan is that our legal system is both British constitutional and Islamic law, right? So it's two extremely different things. And I think the fact that the extremes actually point to almost a schizophrenic sense of an identity of us not really understanding or knowing who we are. And so I mean, there's so much we can talk about when it comes down to that, but I think without maybe meaning to pinpoint it on two things that are actually really reflective of some of the major challenges that exist in the country right now.
I know we have the Aurat March coming up around the corner, which always brings its own controversy to the country. Last year, it was the slogan, Mera Jism Meri Marzi, and people lost their mind. And so I want to ask you, Kalsoom, kick it off. Why do you think the Aurat March is so misunderstood in Pakistan? Do you think it is effective in bringing women's rights to Pakistan?
Yeah, for sure. And in short, yes. The Aurat March is amazing because in a lot of ways, beyond the people that are organizing it, it is such a democratized thing in terms of everyone can show up on that day. And I think we've seen such a diversity of people that are in those marches. And like we've seen amazing artists like Shazal Malik that have like created amazing posters, and people who have been organizers that are major advocates for everything. It is so important to voice all of these voices, because I think that's the thing. There is diversity when it comes to what it means to be a woman in Pakistan, right? So I don't know if you guys saw, but on Humans of New York the other day, they highlighted Sidr Qasim, who's the co-founder of Atoms.
Beautiful highlight.
Amazing. She's amazing. I've known her since like her and Waqas's early days with their startup. And like I cried so much reading that story. Sidra's story is so important to hear just as much as my story, which is dramatically different, right? Of someone who grew up in privilege and got to go to the US for university, right? Like there is such a diverse range of voices that exist amongst women in the country that is so important. And to have a march that unifies those voices and also brings everybody to the table, I think is important. When we think about the Women's March here in the US, Natasha, people are angry about it here too. People are angry about, when we think about what like incels are, like the community of men who are involuntary celibate, a lot of them are very toxically male and very angry at women. And so that exists in Pakistan. When we see what happened to Misha Shafi, like Misha Shafi is a effing hero right now amongst all women that I know, for her using her privilege and her platform to stand up for sexual harassment in the country, and to see how much that her and any other woman that stood up for her and with her, what they have faced. And so I think it's about damn time. And I'm so glad. And I'm so amazed by the women that I'm friends with that are at that march every single year. And if I was physically there this year, I would have been there too.
Been there too, exactly. Ibaad, we haven't heard from you in a while. What are your thoughts on the Aurat March and its effectiveness in, just highlighting women's issues and women's rights in Pakistan?
So I think, it does a lot to bring exposure to these to the fact that so many women feel that they don't have the rights that they want, right? Especially the Meri Jism Meri, what is it? Meri Jism Kya?
Mera Jism Meri Marzi.
Yeah, Meri Jism Meri Marzi. Like it's, and I don't know why or how, but people need that exposure. Like people don't understand that this is a problem. And I thought maybe, like I live in a bubble where I live in San Francisco and surround myself with like strong, powerful, inspirational women like Natasha and kind of just my whole circle is like that. But as I have conversations with people I'm related to, people who live in the US even, right? Like people everywhere, they have very like well-defined gender roles and gender norms. And I'm like sometimes I'm having conversations with people and thinking like, wow, wait, like today in 2021, we're having this conversation and you really think that like you have the, I don't know, ability to govern any other humans like decisions about their body or and kind of across the board, I'm continually baffled. But really, what it is that sometimes maybe they just don't have exposure, right? Like often that's, I think a lot of ignorance comes from that. And the Art March does a lot to bring these topics kind of at the forefront, right? These are news headlines. These are like we're talking about it now. These are conversations that people have around their dinner table. And yeah, okay, some people are going to hate on it, and some people are going to have like ridiculous reactions to it. But at the end of the day, at least it's highlighting that, hey, this is it's highlighting that this is an issue, which is, I think, important in itself. And this kind of that first stepping stone is kind of like acknowledging that this issue exists.
That's super
right?
interesting. So how do you bring exposure at a young age? Because I think getting exposure, I mean, exposure should happen at any time, but it's most effective when it's, you know, you see this from day one, right? And so what changes, you know, do you think that we need to make, or Pakistan needs to make, in order to give this kind of exposure at a younger age?
So I think, or at least to me, and I'll talk about kind of the exposure that I had and what I see is pretty effective, is having strong role models, strong female role models. I mean, to this day, like my definition of strength is my mom, and it's not like a male. It's not Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know, some bodybuilder or something. It's that. And so when you enable women to have a voice and to be able to act in the capacity to be a role model, people kind of look up to them, and they can kind of they see that, hey, my mom doesn't put up with this BS, or my sister wouldn't put up with that, or my sister can you know, function on her own in this way. And so having that role model is big, and that's more. I mean, you know, there's a lot we need to do to get to that point, but I think that's the, I don't know if that's the biggest way, but at least that's one way to get there.
Yeah.
The thing I also want to say too is that I think that so much of it is also cultural, let alone religious. So, to your point, Abubakar, it's actually not in the religion. When we think about even the story of Adam and Eve in the Quran, it's told in such an equal way compared to, in terms of Adam and Eve were both born from, you know, the same nest, like the same, you know, place. And it wasn't like Eve was the one that led him into temptation the way that it's told in Christianity. And I always think about that as like this story of the birth of humanity is so different in Islam compared to Christianity. But culturally in Pakistan, when we think about like, you know, the founding of like why honor culture exists, so much of that honor culture is cultural, it's not religious. And so when we think about this idea of women being objects, of women being something that they possess or own, that is very much grounded in a lot in honor culture, right? So even when we were talking about people here, a lot of times you come and you also bring back a version of whatever culture you were existing in, right? Like I was in a taxi in the US, like years and years ago, and this guy was telling me how, like, I mean, this is such a bad, I shouldn't talk about this publicly as we're recording, but I was just dumbfounded by what he was saying about women. And I was like, you live here now. Like, I don't understand how you can bring this and this be considered legitimate to you. And it was, I didn't want to get into a debate because obviously it was like me and a man that was driving me. And I was a little bit nervous about that, having a debate about that. But I think that's what's also really important, is distinguishing the differences between both. And I think the problem is that it's so interwoven in our country that, you know, I don't see the same thing in Bangladesh, really interestingly. Maybe it's also the version that I have in my family.
Oh, interesting. Tell us more about that.
I mean, it's not, everything that I would say would be very qualitative and based on my own experience. So I don't have enough information to say it, because obviously we see a version of, like, you know, we can have a whole conversation about like, you know, Saudi madrasas and things like that that have come to Bangladesh and have, you know, certain things that have taken hold there. But for the most part, when you even look at like what Grameen has done and Brock has done in Bangladesh, I mean, it's such a matriarchal, generally that culture there's so many strong women in Bangladesh. Like it's such a stronger matriarchal culture that I never experienced or saw in Pakistan on the same side of it. And so it's not saying that I have a lot of very amazing female role models in Pakistan, right? And I definitely see that there, but maybe it's also the family that I come from in Bangladesh of being so matriarchal, so dominated by very strong women and being surrounded by that growing up. And then Pakistan kind of seeing a very different version of, you know, it felt so much more conservative in Pakistan versus Bangladesh when I moved from one country to another.
But I have friends, I know you've all seen that video of someone talked about language earlier, and you had the whole cannoli thing.
Oh, do we want to get into this?
But the only reason I bring it up is you saw like it just popped, it exploded. Instagram, WhatsApp. So I thought it was interesting. Obviously, I'm not a big cancel culture guy, but I thought it was a big deal that they're just like, dude, this is not cool. So yeah, things can go
Bob, you started laughing at that. Do you have any thoughts on the cannoli debacle, as they're calling it?
No, I'm not even familiar with it. In fact, I'll look it up right now.
You got to dive into that. Oh man.
I don't know if you should
explain it. I feel like you would do such a good job.
You know, actually, what I'll do a good job on is one of my friends, he showed up there with a group of guys and they started doing some Urdu poetry and then that went viral. So Ibaad, there was these two women, they run a restaurant in Islamabad, and then they were making fun of their manager for not being able to speak good English, and they're speaking in their accents. That is Pakistan in a nutshell.
Okay.
I'm like, yo, we're so fixated on like we want to speak English, but Urdu is so poetic and so deep, but we don't really realize that either.
Yeah, we have a post-colonial hangover, really.
Jarrell's, you brought up Kalsoom came out, I think it was last year, was banned, came back. And one of the actresses from Jarrell's, Sarwat Gilani, just went on to Mira Sethi's show and talked about how she's not a feminist. And, you know, going through that episode, reading through the comments, I think a lot of that is rooted in Pakistan just not understanding feminism. So why do you think that is? And where do you think that gap comes from? Kalsoom, or you want to take that? You want to start with that?
Sure. Do you guys want to start first? I've been talking a lot.
Ibaad, do you want to take that? Do you have a thought on that?
I'd like to have Kalsoom started, but then I can share my thoughts after that.
Yeah, I don't think it's just Pakistan. There's been so many famous actresses in Hollywood who have also said that they are not feminist. And I think there's an overall lack of understanding of what feminism actually means and this idea that by being feminist, we somehow hate men. And I think that's when I've dug into this, because I've had a few female friends who I know are feminists by everything that they behave. I mean, obviously we can say that about the main actress in that show, right? Every single thing that the way that they behave is as a feminist. There's so many men who I know who are feminists, right? But are just immediately, they're like, oh, no, we're not feminists. Like, don't worry, like we're okay. Or like, they think it's some sort of like bad thing that you're some sort of militant person if you are. Right. So there's a negative connotation associated with it. But the minute you start digging into that and actually asking questions and, you know, say like, do you believe that women and men should have the same rights? Do you think that women and men should be paid for the same work? Do you believe this? And if everyone says yes, I'm like, you're an effing feminist. It's not hard. And so I think it's just, there's a really awful perception right now that's been reinforced by certain things that have been happening in the world, and how, like, you know, the Me Too movement, for all the good that it's done, has also made people feel vilified. And cancel culture, to Abubakar's point, I'm totally against that as well, because it doesn't allow us to actually evolve in our thinking and actually be able to have deeper conversations, because I believe that everyone can be brought into these conversations. And even if someone's a misogynist, like, we can at least have a conversation and understand why, right? So I mean, I think it's not just Pakistan that there is an issue in perception. It's everywhere in the world right now. And for me, most women that I know, I mean, most of my friends, obviously I'm in a community of very strong feminists, women and men. And my brother is calls himself a major feminist all the time. And I'm so proud that we raised him that way. But, you know, I think that it's important to at least understand and unpack why people are saying that before we just say that, oh, they're obviously not a feminist.
That makes sense. Ibaad.
And I'll try to reserve as much of my personal bias and personal opinions in this as I can, because I just want to kind of better understand what that means. And so, Kulsum, you said like one part of feminism is men and women having equal rights. And so, how do you reconcile that with like some of the Islamic teachings about the rights of a man versus the rights of a woman? And so, for full context, like the reason why I'm helping my mom get her NICOP card, my mom's one of 13 siblings. There are 7 girls and 6 boys, and they my grandmother's house is being divvied up because they're selling it, and my mom gets what 1/19 of a share, and the men get 2/19 of a share because the way it's
The property rights,
split
yeah.
up, right, and a lot of the like counter arguments that I've heard from people who are staunchly anti-feminist or not feminist is that and I'm paraphrasing from a lot of different perspectives, I think, but the gist of it is that God has defined gender roles to be in a certain way, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not equal, they're just different. And the examples that I've heard are a man cannot birth a child, and so that is an interesting way where a man has his responsibility and a woman has her responsibility. So that's the argument I've heard, and so to kind of come back, that's all. That was my unbiased reiteration of what I've heard. Now with my analysis of it, I feel like some of the kind of what you asked, Natasha, is why is feminism so misunderstood in Pakistan? And I feel like some of it comes from this culture, and I won't even say that it's the religion necessarily, because I think a lot of that has been modified in certain ways or misconstrued or whatever have you. But that clearly articulates and sets a precedent for inequality, at least. I mean, maybe not inequality, but define gender roles that are different.
If I can add to that, the more that I dive deeper into different religions, and I spend a lot of time with different religions. I was a keynote speaker at the Parliament of World Religions in 2018 out here in Toronto. And what I found was look, going to Islam, since we're talking about Pakistan, I just look at, again, the Prophet Muhammad SAW as the greatest example. That's what we had. That's what they always say. So I left, I bounced. I was doing different religions. I'm like, yo, Islam, I need to take a break. And then when I came back, the more I researched about his life, the more I was like, wait a minute, I'm so confused. Because with him, if you look at him, he basically was a man that was, first of all, very secure with who he was. And that was through his life, his love. He really was it was that's how masculine is actually supposed to be. A masculine is not supposed to be taking from the feminine or trying to control it. And if you look at how he dealt with, how his relationships were, it's so against the way we are now, right? How Hazrat Khadija radiallahu anha was the one that was the breadwinner. She was the one that when there was no dowry, when they got married, he moved into her house. She was not a virgin. She already had children from beforehand. She had been married beforehand. You look at all this and you're like, wait, this is Hazrat Khadija, and Islam spread on her based on her money. So we use that example a lot. I know people do, right? But then you look at Hazrat Aisha, I'm just trying to say we don't treat as Muslims, I'm just focusing on Pakistan and Muslims and men. We have such a great example there, but we do not follow that. But I think that also requires a lot of work. And I think that's why with feminism, it's kind of like what's happening right now. I've been having a lot of meetings with the farmers protests. And we're talking about, look, it's just, you have buzzwords and then people just they latch on to buzzwords. Let's say feminism, you talked about it earlier, Kalsoom, you had the Me Too movement where the Me Too movement grew so big. And then it got fractured after the whole Aziz Ansari incident, where it's what the hell is going on? Do you remember that? It did. After that, people were confused of what is the movement really about? So why I bring that up is that I think it all requires a lot of work, which is not being done. The work of a man to understand what healthy masculinity looks like. I can't even go into being a feminist. I was what does it even look like to be a healthy masculine? That is not even being shown at all. A healthy masculine is a guy that's grounded in himself and is able, that's not, we don't have those role models. You said we have this insecurity and this anger and this fire. And that's what's now women are having to be even more masculine, and men aren't even men. They're just boys. That's what I'm seeing. I know this is very like just generalizing, but it's like from the word. Then you have these women having to deal with all these boys. And then it's just like, you just have a huge, the issue really is just that everything is helter skelter. So I think that's where, going back to what you were saying, Ibaad, about in Islam, like equality versus, let's say, equity. First, this goes back to the identity crisis again of just with feminine energy and masculine energy. I think that's what's missing right now. So I don't know what she said to Mira Sethi. I know she probably said something along those lines, I ain't a feminist, but I think it's
She
just,
probably didn't want to get branded as an angry person, right? But to Ibaad's point, and those were really great points as well, Abubakar, I think that and there's dogma in religion, but also with Islam specifically, like there's also a practice in Islam of scholarly dialogue, right? Of like actually questioning things and pushing things. And that's actually something that's really beautiful about our religion generally, right? And I think if we were to freeze everything in time, then we wouldn't, if separate but equal, we would still have segregation in this country, right? If separate but equal, that we'd still have certain things that were in place that didn't allow for actual interpretation and movement and evolution forward. My point is that I think that ultimately, like, there are things that are in place, and oftentimes the laws that are created are laws that are made by people who are in the status quo. The people who are in the status quo are oftentimes men, right? Yep. And if you actually have people who are at the table, who are just like we talked about, like if they're actually like people that are going to be people that are going to be part of the law themselves, like if there are women at that table and negotiating table, and that doesn't happen enough in Pakistan. If we have more people, and if it becomes an issue of religion, then have female Islamic scholars that are discussing
my mom
this.
trains female muftis. My mom
exactly,
like,
and I know of female muftis, right?
Yeah.
So
why do women have to go to men to learn about, like,
yeah.
Aisha was the one that most hadiths, I think it was second or third, most hadiths were learned from her. So it's like women have to go to a man, and there's a lot of times where we've heard where when that happens, they get taken advantage of. Like it's like we have to decentralize that from just men.
Yeah.
That they can teach Islam. So I apologize.
Yeah. No, not at all. I mean, I agree with you, and I just think that yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, I just think that all of this ultimately means that we need to be having dialogue, and the people that are going to be impacted by that dialogue need to be the people and the stakeholders at that table. So I think that needs to happen in order to be healthy in how we move forward. If we're talking about this as a country, but also just generally in this like debate around feminism as well. Like, we need to have men at the table as much as we have women.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, guys, we are coming up to the hour. So I want to make sure I'm respectful of all of your time. I just want to thank you all for joining. This was an amazing discussion. And thank you for taking the time. And, hopefully I'll see some of you soon and talk to some of you even sooner.